It's 7 p.m. Monday, July 29th here in Seoul.
Coming up on News Center tonight. The U.S. agrees that Japan's trade curbs against South Korea set a dangerous precedent and that American firms are bearing the brunt of them. This, according to Seoul's Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hee, following her trip to Washington.
South Korean political parties agreed to set up a consultative body later this week to address Japan's export curbs. A group of lawmakers will also travel to Tokyo in a bid to ease tensions.
Korea's business sentiment for next month falls to the lowest in over a decade as global trade tensions continue to weigh on the economy.
And the recent monsoon rain clears up for the return of sizzling heat. Heatwave advisories and warnings are in effect and will stay in place for the next few days. NEWSCENTER begins now. Hello and welcome to Arirang News Center, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Noaram.
And I'm Hyundai. It's great to have you with us. South Korea's trade minister says American firms are showing strong support to South Korea amid Seoul-Tokyo trade tensions, saying they're starting to feel the impact of Japan's export curbs against South Korea themselves.
Her remarks come following her trip to Washington, where she discussed the issue with key figures from the U.S. government. Oh Jung-hee reports.
U.S. industries have been dealt a blow by Japan's export restrictions on South Korea and are calling for the trade spat to be resolved quickly. That's according to South Korea's Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hee, who visited Washington last week and met with key trade-related officials.
I stress that Japan's export curbs will hurt not only Korea and Japan, but the whole world, including American companies, through the global supply chain. This could shake up the international trade order and weaken coordination among Korea, Japan, and the U.S. on regional security.
Minister Yoo said officials from the U.S. government and Congress, including Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, showed understanding and said they'll work with Seoul. But what was noteworthy, according to the minister, was the response from U.S. industry. American companies have been silent since Japan's announcement, but they sent a letter to Seoul's trade minister saying they've started to feel the impact.
It was not only the U.S. semiconductor and IT industries that took part in writing that letter, but also the manufacturing sector. The letter claimed that Japan's unilateral change in export policy could cause confusion in the global supply chain and deal a blow to overall industry in the long term. They pointed out that there needs to be a quick resolution.
The trade minister said South Korea is always ready to meet with Japan. Seoul had proposed that the trade ministers of the two countries meet on the sidelines of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership meeting later this week, but Tokyo turned that down. Japanese media are reporting that Tokyo will decide whether to take Seoul off its export whitelist on August 2nd, and the minister said Seoul is getting ready for all possible scenarios. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea's rival parties are speeding up their efforts to address Japan's export curbs against Seoul. They have agreed to establish a consultative body later this week, while a group of lawmakers will also be traveling to Tokyo in a bid to ease tensions. Our Kim Min-ji at the National Assembly first tonight.
South Korea's 5 main parties will launch a consultative body on Wednesday to deal with Japan's export controls on Seoul. The body will be tasked with drawing up countermeasures against Tokyo's actions, especially with Japan also on track to remove Seoul from its list of white countries that face minimal trade restrictions. The body will include rival lawmakers as well as related government ministers and representatives of the private sector. The move comes after President Moon Jae-in and the chiefs of the 5 main parties had agreed to launch the body earlier this month as part of forming a unified national response.
In our first meeting, we plan to be briefed by the finance ministry on the current situation and discuss this new body's operations and its key functions.
In line with those efforts, a South Korean parliamentary delegation will also visit Japan for 2 days starting Wednesday. The 10-member team plans to hold a luncheon meeting with Fukushiro Nukaga, chief of a parliamentarians' union between the two countries and a member of Japan's ruling party. The South Korean lawmakers are also trying to arrange meetings with other ranking parliamentary officials, although nothing has been confirmed as of yet. The delegation is expected to make most of their time by discussing ways to ease the heightened tensions, as well as deliver Seoul's stance on the matter. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Senior government officials are reportedly either canceling or postponing their summer vacation plans to deal with key issues facing Korea. President Moon Jae-in has also canceled his week-long holiday to closely monitor situations on Japan's export curbs and North Korea's latest missile launches, among others. Our Shin Se-min has more.
The decision makers in the South Korean government are taking no breaks this summer so they can keep working on a series of issues the country is facing. The presidential office said Sunday that President Moon Jae-in will not be going on his usual week-long summer break, initially scheduled for this week, so he can keep up to date on Japan's trade curbs and North Korea's latest missile launches. The top office said the president will be at his office this week, where he'll be briefed by his aides on matters that require his attention. He did, however, go on an unannounced 2-day trip to Jeju-do Island this past weekend, related to what the top office explained was a personal matter. This is the first time Moon, as president, has called off his summer leave, and it comes at a time when Japan's trade restrictions look set to get more severe. Japanese cabinet is reportedly looking at taking South Korea off its whitelist of preferred trading partners this Friday, a move that could seriously disturb the supply chains of more than 1,000 products. And President Moon isn't the only one calling off his vacation. Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon and the Deputy Prime Minister, who also serves as Finance Minister, are doing the same. According to his office, the Prime Minister will be working as usual through his week-long summer leave, initially scheduled to start on August 8th. Finance Minister Hong Nam-gi has canceled his one day off, which was Monday the 29th, and the Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy, Sung Yun-mo, also reportedly called off his summer vacation set for mid-July. The leader of the ruling party, Lee Hae-tan, will be on standby even during his leave and will be working on measures to respond to several pending issues. All these moves seen as a way of showing the South Korean government's determination to handle what's being viewed as a national crisis and perhaps also sending a strong message to Japan. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
So it looks like South Korea will have to brace for even more trade restrictions from Japan. And these could affect a wide range of local industries, from cars to electronics and high-tech goods. Our Yoon Jung-min has the details.
It is highly likely that Japan will exclude South Korea from its so-called white list of 27 countries that receive preferential treatment on trade. Once removed, Japanese exporters won't be able to ship goods to South Korea unless they are approved on a case-by-case basis, along with the required documentation. The process will take about 3 months, causing inevitable delays in shipping and the production of goods. Experts say industries that are heavily dependent on intermediary goods from Japan will be affected. Nearly 1,100 items will fall under new restrictions, including those related to automobiles, electronics, and machinery. Among them are silicon wafers used in semiconductors, which are almost monopolized by Japanese firms. Carbon fibers used in aircraft and automobiles, machine tools, and goods related to fine chemicals could also be affected.
Japan is more likely to target South Korea's high-tech industries instead of the conventional one. For example, cars using internal combustion engine wouldn't cause so much of a problem, but hydrogen cars may bump into trouble if a key material is missing. Also, Japan may target non-memory semiconductors rather than DRAM.
Some experts pointed out that South Korean companies should look for alternative suppliers in other countries to cushion themselves against the imminent blow.
Companies may consider taking over high-tech firms through M&As to shorten the time. Aside from Japan, hydrogen fluoride used in semiconductors and displays also come from China and Taiwan. So turning the attention to companies in those countries can be one of the possible measures.
But experts also point out that for some materials, there are no viable alternatives to Japanese suppliers. In the long term, they say Seoul and Tokyo must sit down for talks to solve the issue diplomatically and dial down the conflict. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
At the heart of Seoul-Tokyo tensions lies the issue of wartime forced labor compensation. And more Japanese scholars are voicing concerns over Japan's economic retaliatory measures, criticizing the Japanese government over its stance on the wartime forced labor compensation issue. Our Lee Ji-won has more.
Renowned Japanese writer and journalist Hirose Takashi has said that a sum of $500 million given to South Korea by Japan following their 1965 agreement was not a compensation for the victims of forced labor during Japan's colonial rule, and as such, the issue has not been cleared yet. The agreement on the settlement of problems concerning property and claims and the economic cooperation between Korea and Japan was signed in an effort to normalize bilateral ties. According to the pact, Tokyo provided Seoul with various funds to help in the normalization of relations. In a column published on Japan's weekly SI last week, Takashi referred to two previous government statements that refute Japan's current stance that the issue was resolved. The first statement is from former Japanese Foreign Minister Etsuzaburo Shina at the plenary session of the Japanese Diet in November 1965, about 5 months after the treaty was signed. Takashi highlights how Shina says the money is not a form of compensation, and it is rather a celebratory fund for South Korea's new start. The second statement is by then director of the Japanese Foreign Ministry's Treaties Bureau in 1991. When the Japanese parliament asked if a Japanese national could file a claim for assets they had left in an overseas location that was colonized by Japan, Yanai said that the right of individuals to seek reparations has not been terminated. This is in line with South Korea's Supreme Court's ruling last year that led to the current standstill between Seoul and Tokyo. Based on the victims' right to file for reparations, the court ordered Nippon Steel and Sumitomo Metal Corporation to pay each of the 4 victims around $87,000. The Japanese writer says the ruling is fair for the victims and adds that his government has not yet admitted its colonial wrongdoings. He said the forced labor of over 700,000 Koreans for the development of Japan is no different from how the Nazis sent the Jews to the infamous Auschwitz concentration camp. However, despite such voices from within Japan, the Abe administration continues to hinder Japanese companies from making their own decisions or compensating the victims. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Business sentiment in Korea has fallen to its lowest point in more than a decade. The prolonged US-China trade war and Japan's export restrictions are being cited as reasons for the pessimism. Kim Da-mi with the details.
Local firms in South Korea have a grim outlook for the nation's economy in August. That's according to the Korea Economic Research Institute's survey released on Tuesday. The business survey index of the country's top 600 companies by sales came to just 80.7 for next month. That's sharply down from 92.3 the month before. It's also the lowest forecast since the aftermath of the global financial crisis in 2009. For the past 15 months in a row, the business index has stayed below 100, meaning there are more pessimists than optimists on the local economy. The index for the manufacturing sector was especially low at around 75. The institute pointed to weak domestic demand amid the economic slowdown and the prolonged US-China trade war. Japan's latest export curbs were another reason for the pessimistic outlook. The institute noted that the Seoul-Tokyo trade dispute has created uncertainties in the local economy, and local firms are worried that the trade dispute may lead to lower production. It also pointed to seasonal reasons such as the summer holidays. However, highlighting that the sentiment was much lower than the previous months, the institute says the government needs to come up with policies to encourage companies to invest while responding to internal and external risks. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
Turning to the local market now, Korea's tech-heavy KOSDAQ on Monday closed at 618.78 points, the lowest in more than 2 years. The secondary bourse lost 25.81 points, or 4% from the previous session, as individual investors sold off around $591,000 worth of stocks. Experts say the massive sell-off on the tech-heavy index reflects concerns about external uncertainties amid Korea's ongoing trade spat with Japan. The benchmark KOSPI, meanwhile, also closed down on Monday by 1.78%, finishing the session at a 2-month low of 2,029.48. South Korea has sent back 3 North Korean fishermen who crossed the inter-Korean sea border over the weekend. Seoul notified the North this morning via the Joint Liaison Office, and the crew and the fishing boat were handed over in the afternoon in the East Sea. Late on Saturday, a North Korean boat with 3 crew members crossed the northern limit line and entered South Korean waters. The South Korean military towed the boat to a naval base and questioned the crew. It was found that while the boat does belong to the North Korean military, the fishermen did not cross the border deliberately. They claimed to have accidentally headed towards the south because they had no GPS and depended on a compass. The military says the crew were civilians and had fishing equipment, clothing and food on board. In a much-needed breakthrough at South Korea's parliament, the floor leaders of the 3 main parties have agreed on the parliamentary agenda for July. Starting Tuesday, the National Assembly will convene the relevant standing committees to address growing security concerns such as North Korea's recent missile launches, airspace violations by China and Russia, as well as Japan's trade retaliation. The rival parties also agreed to hold a plenary session on Thursday to vote on the $5.7 billion extra budget bill that's been stuck in limbo for over 3 months. Lawmakers will also vote the same day on resolutions condemning Japan's export curbs and air intrusions by China and Russia. The new session comes 10 days after the June session ended with nothing passed. Some good news for the South Korean economy. The nation's exports of medicine and medical supplies hit a record high last year, showing signs that Korea's medicine industry is growing both in quantity and quality. Kim Mo-kyun reports.
South Korea's exports of local medicines and medical supplies surpassed the 5 trillion won mark in 2018, recording an all-time high in the sector. The Ministry of Food and Drug Safety announced on Monday that the total exports of Korean medical products reached $4.67 billion in 2018, up nearly 15% from the previous year. The sector has been growing rapidly over the past 5 years, with an average annual growth rate of 17.9% since 2014. By item, overseas shipments of finished medicines ready for consumption made up 66% of the exports, followed by biomedicines, which accounted for 33%. By destination, exports to Europe were the highest with nearly $998 million in sales, followed by Asia with $155 million and North America with $126 million. Export growth was most evident in Turkey, which jumped nearly 137% on year, followed by Germany with 108% and Indonesia with 48%. The ministry attributed the rise in exports to outstanding performances from local pharmaceutical companies on the global stage. It said that with more local biomedicines receiving licenses from abroad, Korea's medicine industry is growing both in quality and quantity. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
Now, as the monsoon front left the country, South Korea is now seeing some heat waves. Heatwave advisories and warnings were issued today in most parts of the country, and hotter weather is likely to continue in the coming weeks. Our Choi Si-young with the details.
As of Monday morning, heatwave advisories were issued in Seoul, Busan, and most of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces. Heatwave warnings are issued when the daily high is expected to stay above 35 degrees Celsius for 2 or more days in a row. Advisories go out when it's staying above 33. The advisories were also issued in most parts of the central Chungcheong-do provinces, with the southern city of Gwangju put under a heat wave warning. South Korea's weather agency warns that too much exposure to heat can cause several health problems such as heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Heat exhaustion happens when the body overheats. It causes symptoms such as muscle cramps, excessive sweating, and cold skin. Staying hydrated is the key to preventing it. If heat exhaustion goes unaddressed, it can lead to heat stroke, which is a much more serious condition and requires emergency treatment. Heat stroke causes loss of consciousness, organ failure, and can even be deadly. The most important thing to do is to lower the body's core temperature. The agency says the country will likely see heat waves continue in the coming weeks, so people should stay indoors and drink plenty of water. Choi Xiong, Arirang News.
Another chaotic weekend in Hong Kong as protests against a controversial extradition bill continued for an 8th consecutive week. Now, the Chinese government has for the first time delivered an official announcement on the issue, one that was not a surprise to many. Won Zhonghwan with more.
Monday saw the first major press conference from Beijing on Hong Kong issues since the former British colony was handed over to China in 1997. The Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office under the State Council was responding to the escalating civil unrest that has beset the city's government since June. The spokesman for the office, Yang Guang, said the unrest has created a serious negative economic impact for Hong Kong, and that this has been disheartening to people who treasure the city, referring to violent clashes and the police's discovery of suspected bomb-making equipment. Yang also delivered the central government's support for the Carrie Lam administration. He said Beijing strongly supports the current administration and efforts by the police to enforce the law. He then briefly mentioned Hong Kong's history with the mainland, saying that one country, two systems is the best way to govern the city, and that the central government will not change the direction of that system. Finally, he explained in more detail what the central government expects from Hong Kong, laying out 3 factors: to firmly oppose violence, to firmly safeguard the rule of law, and to end political conflict as soon as possible. It was Beijing's first press briefing amid a wave of mass protests and violent clashes that has continued for around 2 months. And suggesting that Beijing is unlikely to change its position, it appears the situation is unlikely to be resolved anytime soon. Meanwhile, a group of Hong Kong civil servants from various government departments issued a statement last week saying they would organize a rally to support the protesters, estimating that about 500 people would take part. If so, that will be the first time for a group of civil servants to join the anti-government protest. Won Zhonghwan, Arirang News.
At least 4 people have been killed and 15 injured in a shooting at a food festival in California on Sunday evening local time. A gunman started shooting his rifle into the crowd at the annual Garlic Festival in Gilroy, a town located near San Jose. 3 victims were killed at the site. The suspect became the 4th person to die after getting shot by the police. Police did not identify the gunman and said they are unaware of the motive behind the attack. Some witnesses have reported there could be a second suspect. Authorities, however, said they don't know yet whether the accomplice, if there was one, was engaged in the shooting. Earlier this year, South Korea mourned the loss of one of the women who had been sexually enslaved by Japan during World War II. Kim Bokdong was admired here and around the world for her campaign to get justice for the victims. As our Oh Soo-young reports, her legacy will now live on in a film coming out next week.
27 years of fighting for justice. After being systematically raped by Japanese soldiers from the age of 14. Kim Bokdong passed away earlier this year at the age of 92, without the apology or redress she hoped to see from the Japanese government. But her story doesn't end with her death. Her mission lives on.
We can forgive them if they say sorry or forgive us. Then we would be able to forgive them.
A documentary about Kim's life captures the raw emotion in her voice, the anguish as she recounts her past during her testimony in 1992. She was one of the first so-called comfort women to speak out about the Japanese Imperial Army's wartime sexual enslavement of Korean girls. The 105-minute film shows that Kim should not just be remembered as a victim of a painful tragedy and heinous atrocity who was alienated by her family. Kim became a symbolic figure in Korea and around the world, advocating for the anti-war movement, uncovering the truth about sexual slavery, and campaigning for women's rights issues. Key moments of her lifelong fight for justice, the weekly Wednesday protests in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul, and the installation of the Statue of Peace there and in other parts of the world, are highlighted in the film. The film's director, investigative journalist Hong Won-gun, says he hopes to make it clear that Kim's work isn't over. The victims of Japan's sex slavery have yet to receive a genuine, heartfelt apology that they can make peace with in their lifetime.
I think the movie will inspire Koreans to think about this issue in a level-headed way and consider what we can do about it.
But he says time is running out. Only 21 Korean victims are still alive, as most of them have already passed away. The film will hit the big screen on August 8th. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
It's been a sensational season for South Korean golfer Ko Jin-young. She's won her second major of the year in a two-shot victory at the 2019 LPGA Evian Championship. Our Lee Seung-jae has a story.
South Korea's Ko Jin-young didn't let a little rain put a damper on her quest for a second major victory of the season. On Sunday, she fired a 4-under 67 to win the 2019 LPGA Evian Championship at Evian Le Bon by 2 strokes with a 15-under par overall. Despite the start of the fourth and final day of the competition being delayed by 2 hours due to the wet conditions, the 24-year-old kept her composure and took advantage of her playing partner and close friend Kim Hyo-ju's late collapse to cruise to victory. Her first LPGA title of the season came at the 2019 ANA Inspiration in April. For the 2018 LPGA Rookie of the Year, the victory means she moves back to number 1 in the world rankings, leapfrogging Park Sung-hyun, who finished the tournament tied for 6th. The winner's check of $615,000 also catapults her to the top of the LPGA money list with nearly $2 million. Ko's victory also ends a streak of 10 different players winning the previous 10 majors. And another major kicks off on Thursday, and it's a big one, the Women's British Open. It's the first time since 1960 that 2 women's majors have been played in back-to-back weeks. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The number of men working in the private sector who took paternity leave in the first half of this year was up nearly 31% from the same period last year to slightly over 10,000. That's being attributed partly to a changing social atmosphere and policies that encourage a better work-life balance, but financial support from the government is considered the most important reason. According to the Labour Ministry, there's been a gradual increase in the number of men on paternity leave over the past 10 years. Korea's 2 biggest car makers are nearing another major milestone. By next year, Hyundai and Kia are expected to reach 100 million overseas sales. They are currently just 8 million shy of that forecast. Their overseas sales have been boosted over the past 4 decades due to more factories overseas, now at 20 factories in 13 countries. The first country they exported to was Qatar in 1975. Korea's Financial Supervisory Service is reminding those heading overseas this summer to report lost or illegally copied credit cards to local police and freeze them immediately. The FSS says cases of credit card theft tend to surge in the third quarter of the year. The agency suggests that vacationers reduce their credit card limits, avoid ATMs in secluded areas, and keep receipts for every transaction. They should also avoid using dynamic currency conversion, which makes travelers pay in Korean currency while abroad and charges extra transaction fees. If a card is used without authorization, make sure to get a police report from the local authorities and submit it to your card company. Photographer Im An-na has become the first South Korean to receive the Photo Folio Review Award at the Arles International Photography Festival. With her photo series Rehearsal of Anxiety, Im tries to tell a story of how South Koreans are affected by media reports on North Korea's nuclear issues. She will hold an exhibition of the award-winning series at next year's Arles Festival. That has been your 3-minute newsflash.
Intense heat waves are gripping the nation now that the monsoon rain has dissipated.
Let's get more on the weather from our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle.
The rainy season has ended as of today, so temperatures are going to rise even higher. Now, the week started off hot, but Tuesday will be even more so with a good amount of sunshine like today. And at the same time, the surrounding countries will have fairly similar weather conditions. And heat wave alerts are in effect again, and they're expanding across the country. Now, tomorrow's daily highs are expected to soar well into the low to mid 30s, meaning it will be hotter, so avoid the peak hours of the day to prevent any chances of heat stroke. And we're also in for some hot and humid tropical nights as the heat stays captured within the peninsula. And Seoul and most parts of the country will wake up to 25 degrees Celsius tomorrow. And during the day, the upper regions will have some cloud cover and local showers. Seoul will peak up to 32 degrees, while Daegu and Gyeongju are hotter, reaching 35 degrees with stinging sun. And there are no signs of rain other than light sporadic showers. And as for temperatures, they're expected to soar towards the weekend. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That will do it for this edition of Arirang News. Thank you, as always, for watching.
News in Depth is next.